Thank you. Listening to God. Again, God often speaks in surprising, unexpected ways. And we're going to see that as part of our text, but not all of it, this morning as we look at Exodus chapter 18. Now, our last time together while we're here in the book of Exodus, last week, if you remember, toward the end, I told you that starting this week, we were going to begin looking at possible places for the actual location of Mount Sinai. If you were here, you remember that. We'll do that much like we did with the Red Sea crossing. We'll do that with Mount Sinai. I'll really take a few minutes over the next few weeks at the start of the lesson to really start to pull that apart. If you remember, when we looked at the Red Sea crossing, where they likely crossed, we did it across three lessons, lesson 14, 15, and 16. I say that in the event you missed that and you're interested in what I had to say about that topic. It's about the first 15 or 20 minutes of lessons 14, 15, and 16. You'll have it all. And we're going to do something similar. Now, to take us back, though, if you remember, when we did that, we had the 7 likely locations, the largest accepted positions of where they crossed the Red Sea. The 3 there, they would have been in Egypt prior to crossing, and then the 4 over here. 3 deep water crossings, 1 there, the Gulf of Suez. These 2 would have been deep water crossings. And then these upper 4, would have been shallower water crossings in Egypt as well as in the northern Sinai Peninsula. If you remember, we used these 7 points from the scriptures to really boil it down. And when we used those 7 points and boiled it down, we ended up with likely 2. The northern spot in the Gulf of Aqaba, the Nueva Beach, and the southern spot in the Gulf of Aqaba, the Straits of Tiran. And then we looked at history and we looked at archaeology. I don't know that we were ever certain, although I think all the evidence points closer to that one. You can never be sure. And I would argue that either one could be, although and I'm not a betting man, but if I were, I would place my thoughts with that one. And so that's where we left off, really, as we looked at that. And beginning today, we're going to answer the question, where is the real Mount Sinai where Yahweh met with the nation of Israel? Well, Yahweh met with Moses in the first place. Now, so you know, in 2023, an academic symposium was convened to address this very topic. Where is the real Mount Sinai? It is interesting, after this many years, we're still searching for the real mountain. Just so you know, in that symposium, they brought forward 20 possible mountain site locations. So what I was thinking we would do is we'd take about half an hour for each of those sites. That should only take about 10 hours. No, I'm just kidding. And build the case. No, I'm just kidding. But I do want us to look at the top 6. But we'll do it in a fairly quick way. Like we did with the Red Sea crossing, we'll use the Bible to determine where those spots are. Now, so you know in advance the sites we're going to look at, and don't worry, I'll show them on a map. So in case you're wondering, that's not very helpful, Rich. We'll look at Jabal Musa. That is the traditional Mount Sinai. We'll look at Jabal Sinai. That's a little north of that. We'll look at Hashim el Tarif. We'll look at Har Karkam. We'll look at Hala el Bader, and we'll look at Jabal el Lawz. So let's just walk our way through those. The first one is Jabal Musa. This is the traditional Mount Sinai location in the Sinai Peninsula. This is the most common accepted location for Mount Sinai. If you open your Bible and go to the back and you have a map, it likely has Mount Sinai there. It may have a question mark next to it, but it likely has it there. The second location is Jabal Sinai. This is still located in the Sinai Peninsula. This is north of Jabal Musa. It's very close to an Egyptian copper mine. What has given it at least attention in these recent days is all of the pro-Hebraic carvings they have found in that copper mine. That's just being totally transparent of what's gotten it attention lately. The next one is Hashim el Tarif. This is in the northern edge of the Sinai Desert, the Sinai Peninsula. This is a very modern theory, but it fits well with some of the distances in the Bible. It is a plateau mountain, so it's a very short mountain, but it has gained popularity within the last 5 to 10 years. The next one is Har Karkom. Now, Har Karkom is actually within the borders of Israel. Now, obviously, at this point, they were not a nation. What has given this attention, it is also a plateau mountain, so that you know. What has given it attention, at least lately, is the thousands of rock carvings in this general area. And so proponents of this mountain say this is where the nation of Israel was for the 11 months that they camped at the mountain, and that's why you have so many of these rock carvings. And so I sort of let a cat out of the bag, just so you know, and we'll see it soon enough today, just in passing, next week in detail. they camped at that mountain for about 11 months. So although they've been traveling to the mountain, they're going to be at that mountain for about 11 months. And so those are the 5 so far. There's 2 more. Hala al-Badar. Now, Hala al-Badar is here in Midian, in the far eastern reaches of Midian. This is one of the tallest volcano mountains in that area. This has become a popular site recently for people who believe that Exodus 19 is describing a volcano. The way it describes the smoke and the way it describes the sound, there's some people who believe, I'm not one of them, but there are, and so they would lean toward this mountain, which is a volcanic mountain. And then finally, Jebel el-Lawz. This is another popular, it's probably the second most popular. It is the highest peak in the eastern Midianite mountain range, and there's a lot of archaeological support that people would point to with this mountain. So these are the 6 mountains over the next few weeks that we will begin to just look and take a look at. Are they the mountain of God? Now, when we looked at the Red Sea crossing, we had 7 pieces of biblical evidence that we looked at. We're going to do the same thing with Mount Sinai, not 7, but 6. We're going to look at 6 pieces of biblical evidence and answer it for each of those. But I do want you to see something in advance. It'll come back around at point number 1. But if indeed the nation of Israel passed through the Red Sea at one of those places, then I think you would probably agree with me that it is very unlikely that any of those 4 mountains are the true Mount Sinai. They wouldn't have passed through the Red Sea and went up and back around the top of the Red Sea. At least it doesn't make sense. Nor would they have crossed through the Red Sea and then went all the way up and around back over here. So if we were right, I'm not saying we were, I'm saying if we were, then it seems to me we're already down to 2. Now, I thought about doing it that way, but that's not a fair shake. Jebel Musa is this mountain right here. It's the most commonly accepted mountain. So I say let's take the 6 most common mountains that have been presented. We don't have time for all 20, but these are the 6 most commonly accepted. And let's answer the question first biblically, do they fit? Do they fit all the evidence from the Bible? Then we'll look at history. History does have some evidence of where Mount Sinai is, both in Josephus and rabbinic tradition. And then we'll look at archaeology evidence. So we'll do that over the next few weeks. So the biblical evidence, these are the things we'll be looking at. Prior to crossing the Red Sea, the Bible tells us that Israel was already out of Egypt. We'll look at that specifically. The Bible tells us that the mountain of God, Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, was located in Midian. We'll look at that specifically. The Bible tells us that from Mount Horeb to Kadesh Barnea was an 11-day trip. We'll look at that specifically. By the way, I'll show you these Bible verses, so don't worry. The Bible tells us that we're going to need a large area for the nation of Israel to camp at the foot of the mountain for about 11 months. So you shouldn't envision them camping miles down a wadi or anything like that. They're going to camp at the base, the foot of the mountain. The Bible tells us that. And they're going to do it for about 11 months. So the mountain has to have a big area for the nation of Israel to camp at. Number 5, the mountain has to have a stream or a river. Now, you've maybe never heard that before. And Rich, where are you getting that? Don't worry, I'll show you the verse that tells us that. And then finally, the mountain must have a cave. Now, you may be thinking, Rich, I've never heard of that. Don't worry, I'll show you the Bible verse that says the mountain must have a cave. Those are the pieces of evidence we will bring all the mountains to bear underneath. We'll answer those questions about every one of those 6 mountains. So with that, let's go to the first piece of evidence. This is as the nation of Israel is camped in front of the Red Sea. They've not yet gone through the Red Sea. They're camped in front of the Red Sea. Let's read the account because this is going to build the point that already when they were camping at the Red Sea, they were outside the borders of Egypt. So let's look at it. Picking up in Exodus 14, when Pharaoh drew near, you can picture this, they're camped at Yam Suf. The people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to Yahweh. They said, Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? They were not in Egypt when they crossed the Yam Suf, when they crossed the Red Sea. They were already outside the borders of Egypt. This is a critical point. As we look at this point, this eliminates, in Rich's humble opinion, you don't have to agree, but again, eliminates these 4 because these 4 would require a crossing that was over here. Unless we believe they crossed and went like that. If they did that, then you could bring those 2 back in. Fair enough? But right now, for Rich's just approach to this, I would say we eliminate these 4 We can add those two back in if you think they went through and up. And then these two would still be in the mix. Al-Badr and Jabal el-Lawz. So if you were plotting this on a graph and just sort of keeping track of this or keeping score, I think that's how you would score this currently. Now, again, you may want to bring in El Tarif and Har Karkom into a yes. Fair enough, but that's what it would look like. Looking at the second piece of evidence that Mount Sinai is located in Midian. Picking up in Exodus 3, this is the burning bush account. As Moses is going to the mountain, Moses is keeping the flock of his father Jethro, who is the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness. He came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And an angel appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Most scholars believe that clearly Horeb is in Midian, where Moses is. We read further in this account, and this will come back around later, Yahweh speaking to Moses. Moses is explaining why he's not the right ambassador to lead Israel out of Egypt. And Yahweh responds to him, I will be with you. And this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you will serve God on this mountain. So where does Moses expect to bring the people back? Whatever mountain he's at right now. And if indeed the mountain is in Midian, then he's expecting to bring the people back. That's the proof that God sent him. The evidence that Yahweh is with him is you're going to bring the people right back here, right where I'm talking to you, back to Mount Horeb, back to Mount Sinai, back to the mountain of God. Equally, when in Galatians 4, Paul talks about this mountain, he talks about Mount Sinai, and he says it's located in Arabia. Arabia is ancient Midian. He isolates the mountain in Arabia. And so with all that as evidence, none of these four are in Midian. Only Jabal el-Lawz and the name that I keep forgetting, let me look at my notes, Hala el-Badr, only those two are in Midian. The other four are not in Midian. These are in the Sinai Peninsula, these three. This is northern Sinai Peninsula, and this one was actually within the borders of Israel once their borders are established. None of those are in Midian, not in ancient Saudi Arabia. So I would argue that only two fit that scale. If you're keeping score at home, we get 2 yeses, 4 no's. Now, again, you may have 2 yeses over here. I acknowledge that. But just understand as we keep score, as we sort of plot which ones are fitting. The next piece of evidence, it is an 11-day journey from Mount Sinai, from Mount Horeb to Kadesh Barnea. Here's what we read in Deuteronomy 1. It's an 11 days journey from Horeb by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. Now, I suspect that most, if not all of you, do not know where Kadesh Barnea is on a map. I don't know. It's not something I store in my head. Of all the things I have remembered, the location of Kadesh Barnea is not there. Good news, it's located within the borders of Israel. It's located right there. Now, we're told that the mountain was an 11-day journey from Mount Horeb to Kadesh Barnea. I would argue that'll work, and we'll talk how well it works. With these 5, it will not work with Al-Badr. So let's look at the distances so you can decide for yourself. Starting with Jabal Musa, the traditional Mount Sinai, it's a 160-mile journey. They would average 14.5 miles a day for 11 days. So this would be women, children, animals traveling 7 to 8 hours a day. Let's say they average 2 miles an hour. I would say that's achievable. That makes sense to me. I would say that works. Jabal Sinai, which is north of Jabal Musa, 110 miles. They would only need to average 10 miles a day. 5 hours, 6 hours the tops. That seems to work. Hashim El Tarif, 70 miles. Only 6.4 miles a day. Okay, that works. Har Karkom, they're in the border of Israel. It's only 50 miles. Well, now I do begin to wonder, is it an 11-day journey if they're only traveling 4 miles a day? But it works. So we'll leave it as a yes, although I must say, I'm not sure that's what Moses had in mind as an 11-day journey. We then come to Hala al-Badr. It's 260 miles. They would need to average 23.7 miles a day for 11 days. Women, children, and animals. Now, could they do that for a day or two? Maybe. That's traveling 12 hours a day. Could they do it for 11 days in a row? You lose me on that one. So I would say I don't think that fits for that mountain, but you can decide on your own. That's why I'm giving you the numbers. And then Jabal El-Lawz is 190 miles. They would need to average 17.3 miles. If they're doing 2 miles an hour, that's still an 8 or 9 hour trip. That's a long trip too. So I would say I'm going to give it green, but just being completely frank, we're on the outer edges of what I think a nation of 2 million people could do 11 days in a row. But I'll leave all this to you. I just want you to see it. So that is the third piece of evidence. It's that 11-day journey to Kadesh Barnea. Okay, we're going to look at one more piece for today, and then we're going to stop because we actually have a lesson in Exodus 18 that we need to get to. But I'm building all this up, and we'll continue to advance this. By the way, next week, I don't know if I will do it at the start of the lesson. Exodus 19 may very well be the high water mark for the book of Exodus. This is when God descends on Mount Sinai. So I'm just not sure I want to take any time away from that event. So the Lord will speak to me this week, and I'll make a decision on whether we continue at the start of the lesson to look at this information or we skip over 1 week and just focus when God descended on Mount Sinai and all that happened and how Moses describes it and how the people describe it. But we'll make that decision. One more for today, and that's a large place to camp. Next week, we will kick off our lesson with this little bit of information. We'll actually unpack it better next week. I'll just introduce it right now. On the third new moon, that would be the third month. The new moon starts the month. On the third new moon, after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, let's pause for a moment just so you know what we're talking about. If you remember, the nation of Israel left Egypt, what month? First month, 15th day of the month. We're told that multiple times in multiple places. They find themselves at the foot of the mountain in the third month. So you should automatically be thinking, okay, it's at least 45 days, could be as much as 2 months. So just tuck that away for now. We'll talk more about it next week. So they had gone out of the land of Egypt. On that day, they came to the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai. They encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain. They will camp there for 11 months. They will do a whole lot there encamped at the mountain. They must have a campsite that will house 2 to 2.5 million people. The question is, the mountains we're looking at, do they have a campsite? Do they have a flat area that would allow the camping of 2 to 2.5 million people? Jabal Musa, absolutely not. Nothing even close. Jabal Sinai, if you camp them down a wadi, and you can take about 2 miles to camp them down like you camp them down a tunnel, yes. But to be camped the way Moses describes at the base of the mountain, no. Equally, Hala al-Badr, that's a volcanic mountain that's surrounded with all types of very rough terrain. There's no way they can camp anywhere close to that mountain. They've got to get far away to camp. So that leaves only these 3 is having a place where they could actually camp 2 to 2.5 million people. So if you're keeping score at home, this is what this looks like. And by the way, I can share all of this with you guys if you like. And we'll work our way through this. We'll then bring history into it. We'll then bring archaeology into it. But right now, because the one true source, the one faithful source is the Bible. Now, could Rich be misunderstanding a piece of evidence? Absolutely. So understand that as well. But based on how I'm understanding the evidence, here's what I would say so far. Any questions before we leave all of this to pick up next week or the following as we continue to investigate where the real Mount Sinai is, but we want to get back to our lesson today. Okay, hearing none, we'll advance and leave that and go back to our lesson, listening to God. Now, getting back in context of the Exodus narrative, last week, if you remember, we followed the nation of Israel as they left the wilderness of sin, not that it was sinful there, although they did sin there, and they went to Rephidim. There, Yahweh tested them once again. If you remember, the test was similar to what happened in Marah. In Marah, it was bitter water they could not drink was the test. In Rephidim, there was no water. But in either case, the nation responded the same. They responded by a lack of faith. They responded with a lack of trust in Yahweh. Rather than trusting Yahweh or even crying out to Yahweh, the Bible tells us they quarreled with Moses and they grumbled against Moses. And we see this happening over and over again. They display this persistent lack of faith. Once again, we see the kind, merciful, patient, loving God who I'm waiting for God just to do this. I've had enough of you guys. He doesn't do that. Isn't it interesting? He responds to our lack of faith the same way. He is patient. He is kind. He is merciful. He continues to speak into our life even when we exhibit unbelief. And that's what he did with them. He told Moses to take the staff, to grab the elders. I think, Christian, you had the question about the elders. And we're going to see them again this morning. To parade the elders, to go to the rock at Horeb, to strike, to smite the rock, and God would produce water. Water that would feed, that would give, fulfill the thirst of a nation of 2 to 2.5 million people. A massive amount of water that God would produce as they struck the rock. We then moved on. We saw what the Amalekites were doing with the nation, how they were sniping off the tail end of the nation. Ultimately, Yahweh directed them to fight. We saw how the battle played out. We saw that ultimately Yahweh gave the victory through Joshua General and the general Joshua and the men. And we saw when it was all over that they praised their greatness. They praised Moses' greatness. They praised General Joshua. No, that's not what they did. They built an altar and they named it Yahweh Nissi. The Lord is my banner. And we ended here last week with these verses. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it Yahweh Nissi, saying, a hand upon the throne of Yahweh, Yahweh will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Just in passing, I did trace the Amalekites through the Bible all the way to the book of Esther. That is up on our website, both in the miscellaneous documents and in the Exodus study as well. I think it's 3 or 4 pages where I just show you what went on with the Amalekites, what went on with Saul, what went on with David, what went on with King Hezekiah, all the way to Esther, if you're interested in how that played out in real biblical time. As we come to chapter 18, we find a section where at least the end of it is not in chronological order. Now, I'm going to let that sink for a minute because you should say, Rich, if you're bringing stuff if you're claiming something's not in chronological order, brother, you're going to have to prove that. Because I just don't slap the I believe button quite that easy because you said it. What we're going to see here is a parenthesis, a parenthetical that involves Jethro, a man also called Reuel, a man also called Hobab. Now, we're not sure which is a title and which is a name, but he's Jethro's father-in-law. And it seems that in this parenthetical, Moses wants to deal with Jethro and everything that happens with Jethro. So as we're going to see as we plot this whole timeline out, Jethro shows up around the time that they arrive in the Sinai Peninsula, likely because Moses sent messengers to him. You'll see why. He stays there the entire time that they're at the base of the mountain. He stays there for the giving of the law. He stays there for the building of the tabernacle. He stays there until they set out, and then he leaves. The problem is here in Exodus 18, we haven't even gotten to the giving of the law. We haven't even gotten to the 10 Commandments. We haven't even gotten to the tabernacle. And at the end of 18, we'll see him go home. I don't think he actually goes home yet. I think what Moses is doing is making a parenthetical, everything about Jethro. And then he's going to move on to talk about everything that goes down at Mount Sinai. And he doesn't want to talk about Jethro. It's going to be about Yahweh and what Yahweh does. So let me prove that to you, because it's easy for Rich to say that, but he's got to prove it. This is Numbers 10. We'll get the date stamp. Look at it. It's the second year, the second month, on the 20th day. They went out of Egypt on the first year, if you will, the beginning of their months, first month, 15th day. It's now the second month, second year, it's now the second month and the 20th day. They've been camped at this mountain for about 11 months at this point when you read this in Numbers. The cloud lifted from over the tabernacle of testimony. Notice the tabernacle is already built. And the people of Israel set out by stages from the wilderness of Sinai. And the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. They are now on their way to the promised land. They're going straight to the promised land. They're going to take the promised land unless sin should enter the equation. But that's what's going on. A few verses later, we're going to see an interaction that happens between Moses and his father-in-law. Again, 3 names, Jethro, Reuel, and Hobab. Here's what it says in Numbers 10, a few verses later. Moses said to Hobab, the son of Reuel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, we are setting out for the place of which the Lord said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will do good to you, for the Lord has promised good to Israel. But he said, I will depart to my own land and to my own kindred. Here we see that Moses' father-in-law leaves after that 11-month period. But here's what we'll read at the end of our lesson today. Before we've ever given the 10 Commandments, before we've ever built the tabernacle, before anything has happened, then Moses' father-in-law departed and he went away to his own country. I think the reason that happens is Moses is just giving us a parenthetical about Jethro, about Hobab. And so people will take this and say, oh, this is a contradiction. Moses doesn't know when his father-in-law left. I'm sure Moses knew when his father-in-law left. I think what we have in Exodus is not a narrative that's necessarily following the timeline. We've seen him jump camp spots. He's rather hitting highlights, and he wants to tell us everything about Jethro before he goes and talks about the mountain of God, which is the main point. So that's where we are. Any questions about that point before we pick up in Exodus 18, this parenthetical about this man named Jethro, Reuel, or Hobab? Okay, no questions? Let's go. Verse 1. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, how Yahweh had brought Israel out of Egypt. So let's unpack this. Again, I would submit to you this is a narrative bridge. They're in the wilderness of Sinai. They're getting ready to start the whole Mount Sinai experience. All of that is getting ready to happen. And Moses gives us this bridge about his father-in-law, Jethro. Notice that it's there at the mountain of God. That's where this is happening. And you can see here we have Moses with the people, and here we have Jethro. And word gets to Jethro. Now, the obvious question will be, well, how did word get to Jethro? Well, we're back in Midian, number one. It could have been that way. He could have had, people tending his flocks and go, hey, there's a big tribe of people that just showed up. I don't think that's what it was. I think Moses likely sent word to Jethro. I think Moses likely sent word to his father-in-law. You should be wondering why. Why would he do that? You're going to see why here in just a second. He has a very good reason. But I think he sent word to his father-in-law. Notice what was in the word that he sent. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard. Here's what he heard. Shema, by the way, the Hebrew word. We're not told how he heard it, but here's what he heard. He heard about all that God had done for Moses and all that God had done for the nation of Israel. How Yahweh had brought Israel out of Egypt. He heard very specific things. He didn't hear generally there's a bunch of people in the desert. He heard what Yahweh had done. He heard what Yahweh had done for Moses. He heard how God had delivered the nation. I'm now really thinking he heard it from servants, messengers that Moses sent to him. We know when this is happening. We understand likely how it's happening. I would say it's a high probability that Moses is the one sending the messengers. But there is a major theological theme I don't want you to miss. What God is doing for the nation of Israel has just made it to the first Gentile hearer, and his name is Jethro. He's the priest of Midian. Now, the Midianites descended from Abraham through Keturah. So this priest of Midian, his dad was Abraham. His dad worshiped Yahweh, the true and living God. It is likely, and by the way, scholars are all over the map here. They're like, Jethro was a Yahweh-fearer. Jethro was not a Yahweh-fearer. We don't know this, but Jethro had for sure been exposed to Yahweh. We are going to see his testimony about Yahweh here in just a little bit. But understand what's going on. He gets word about the nation being back. Likely he gets it from Moses because the words are very specific. And that brings us to verse 2. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her away, after he had sent her home. Okay, let's pause. Isn't it funny the things you don't know about until you know about them? We had no idea that Zipporah was not with Moses. We had no idea that Moses' sons were not with Moses. The last encounter we had, which we'll look at in a second, was Exodus 4, and they were all together. We assumed, this is important why you don't assume things with the scriptures, right? We would have assumed that Zipporah was still with Moses because we haven't heard anything. She was not. She was back with dad, her father, Moses' father-in-law, along with her two sons. Picking up the text again, verse 3, the name of the one was Gershom, for he, that's Moses, said when he named him, I've been a sojourner in a foreign land. And the name of the other was Eleazar, who Moses named him, for he said, Moses, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. So he named his two sons, and we'll talk about it in a moment, interestingly enough, almost like watermarks in his life. A low watermark and a high watermark. But that's how he named his sons. But let's get back to the thing we didn't know about. And Rich has a question, and I'll click the verse and let Rich ask the question, and I'll explain.
I wasn't sure whether you're going to go here or not. I always make sure you go there, even if you don't want to. When we're looking at Jethro, we're talking about someone who potentially was monotheistic and potentially was a practitioner of monolatry, meaning there is a single God who's singly important in the midst of other gods and other idols. And as you said, when you read what others have to say about it, as many slices, as many different pies as you could have, you get to read. But the reality is, he does recognize the extraordinary gift that Yahweh has given to the people of Israel.
Amen.
And he does get to recognize the part that his son-in-law played.
And so, to go to Rich's point, so I don't bury the lead, it's even more than that. He is going to bring a burnt offering to Yahweh. He's going to offer a sacrificial meal with the nation of Israel to Yahweh. He is going to proclaim the greatness of Yahweh. He's going to launch what looks like a doxology. So I don't know where he was spiritually when he showed up, but he seems to be in a pretty clear place when it all ends. And that, in Rich's humble opinion, he seems to now be a fearer of Yahweh if he was not before. And I'm with you, Rich. He was likely exposed to lots of different Midianite gods, including Abraham's God. But you're going to see what he proclaims based on what he has seen and heard happen with the nation of Israel. But we'll get to that soon enough. So thank you for that, brother. So the last time, to get back to where we were, the last time we encountered Zipporah was way back in Exodus 4. Here's what we read. Yahweh said to Moses while they were in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who were seeking your life are dead." So Moses took his wife and his sons, both of them. He loaded them up on a donkey. They went back to the land of Egypt. Moses took the staff of God in his hand. So we assumed, incorrectly so, Zipporah was in Egypt. Turns out somewhere along the line, in accordance with verses 2, he sent her home. We don't know why. By the way, that word is often used to divorce someone, to send her away. I don't think that's the context here. I think it's protective custody. Let's be honest, Moses likely started watching all these plagues ratchet up with the Pharaoh and all that was going on with Egypt, and he may have determined, I think I'm going to send my wife and kids home. You ready for this? God may have told him to send them home. We don't know. What we do know is they're home. He sent them home, and guess what? They're coming with Jethro, with Reuel, with Hobab. Now, we're even given their names again, Gershom and Eleazar. Now, Gershom, the root there is ger, which means a stranger, an exile, one who's isolated. He names his oldest son Isolation. He names his oldest son Stranger. Wow, what a fun name. Now, the second name, Eleazar, is a compound word. It comes from two words, Eli, God or my God, and Ezer, help. He names his second son, God is my helper. God is my deliverer. And I would say in some ways, this likely pictures Moses' journey spiritually while in Midian. He goes from a man focused on how the nation of Israel has rejected him, how he's become isolated in Midian, to a man who remembers that it's the Lord who is the one who delivers him. Now, as I sat at my desk and thought about that, those two names are very applicable for the Christian experience, are they not? You and I are strangers. We are sojourners. We are pilgrims in this land. And you ready for this? As it was true for Moses, it is true for you and I. The Lord is our helper. The Lord is our deliverer. He's the one who's in the background delivering us, who will ultimately get us home. So it is quite interesting, the name of his two sons. But let's get back to the text, verse 5. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons, with his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he was encamped by at the mountain of God. Now, I don't know what whoever got word to Jethro told them, but can you imagine what Jethro expected to see and what he actually saw? He got word that God had delivered the nation of Israel. He got word that God had delivered Moses. And he begins to travel. He goes, Zipporah, grab the boys. We're going to the mountain of God. We're going to Horeb. They're camped out at Mount Sinai. And he's approaching. And he begins to see in the distance people. More people. More people. millions of people. This would have rocked his imagination of anything unless they said, listen, dude, we got a couple of million people, by the way, just be ready. This would have far exceeded anything that he would have imagined he was going to experience. Here they are coming to Moses, who's in the wilderness of Sinai, who's camped at the mountain of God. We looked at this verse earlier. Now I want to make the bigger point. When Moses first began the interaction with Yahweh at the burning bush, Moses ultimately said this in Exodus 3:11. Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He's back and forth with Yahweh. I'm not the right guy. I'm not properly equipped. Who am I? You've got the wrong guy. Yahweh says to him, I will be with you. This will be the sign for you that I sent you. When you brought the people of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. The journey is complete. The promise is fulfilled. Yahweh had told his servant, you will bring the nation back here and serve me, and that is the proof that I am with you, as if you needed any proof, because it's going to make it evident anyway. And here Moses is. The promise has come full circle. He is he's in the Sinai wilderness. He's at the foot of Mount Sinai. The private revelation has become quite public. He is there at the foot of the mountain in the wilderness. Verse 6. And when he sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you. I'm with your wife and her 2 sons. So likely following ancient Near Eastern customs, he doesn't just travel there and show up, but he sends word. He sends word to Moses, I am coming. I am on my way. So the word comes to Moses. Again, he wants to make sure this is a nation that just destroyed Egypt in the Red Sea. This is a mighty nation. This is a large nation. He wants to make sure, hey, Moses is me. It's your father-in-law. I got your wife and kids. This is a peaceful trip. I'm coming in peace. We know each other. No confrontation here. We're on the same team. Moses, it's me. I think that's what he's trying to convey. And obviously he's following appropriate ancient Near Eastern customs as well. So there we are. And I was going to say, are there any questions? But Deb read my mind and raised her hand. Deb. Oh, Mike's coming. I'm sorry. Yeah. Deb's up here. I'm sorry. I should have pointed at her, brother. Yeah, you wouldn't know who I'm.
I'm still learning.
So I find it interesting in the last 3-4 passages, every time he says Jethro, he also says Moses' father-in-law. Is there another Jethro in this story that we would confuse this Jethro with?
There is not. And I think he's just highlighting my father-in-law, my father-in-law, my father-in-law, in this parenthetical about his father-in-law. Because that's what this whole thing is about. It's about everything that goes on with his father-in-law. Anything else before we advance the story?
There is some speculation about the 3 different terms that are used. It's a very minor point, but that one of them, instead of referring to his father-in-law, refers to his brother-in-law.
True.
It's held by a minor group of people when they review the fact that this gentleman had 3 different names, that one of them was really referring to Moses' brother-in-law versus his father-in-law.
Yep. Thank you for that, brother. Anything else? Okay, as we continue to advance the story, so you got what's going on here. Jethro is approaching. He sent word, verse 7. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare, their shalom, and went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that Yahweh had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardships that had come upon them in the way, and how Yahweh had delivered them. All right, let's unpack this. This is a man who just led 2.5 million people out of Egypt. He gets word that his father-in-law is coming. What does he do? He goes out to meet him. He shows profound humility. In spite of how God is using him, he is still Moses. He has not gotten a big head through all this. Many of us might have, our head might be the big as this room by now, the way God has used him. And yet he remains a humble man. He goes out. Now again, ancient Near Eastern customs, he's likely following them. And then when he meets him, notice he bows down. I don't think he was worshiping his father-in-law. I think he was following ancient Near Eastern customs. I think he's showing due respect for his father-in-law. He bows down and he kisses him. They exchange social pleasantries. How is your welfare? How's your shalom? And then they go into the tent. So they go from this social protocol to there in the tent, and it changes completely. What was social protocol there in the open, hey, how's the welfare? How are you doing? How are things going? There in the tent, Moses begins to recount all that has happened in the Exodus. Can you imagine to hear that story? He begins to recount their hardships. No doubt he talked about the bitter waters at Marah. No doubt he talked about the hunger that was in the wilderness of Sin. No doubt he talked about the lack of water at Rephidim. No doubt he talked about how Amalek came out against them. He began to recount all the hardships that they had encountered. But then he also recounted the Netzal, the deliverance that Yahweh had executed through them. And let me make the point. Just as Yahweh delivered his people then, he still delivers his people now. This is a fundamental attribute of our God. He is working for our good. Just a few verses to make the point. The psalmist said it this way: when the righteous cry for help, interpret that those who place faith in Jesus Christ and been made righteous, when they cry for help, Yahweh hears them and delivers them out of their trouble. Our God has a disposition that leans toward his people and caring for his people. You're familiar with the verse, Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose. It doesn't say all things are good, but it does say our sovereign God is working all things for the good together. He's taking the cacophony of events in your life and turning them into a symphony that makes him the primary point, that brings him glory. He's working all things together. In the small group on Friday, we talked a lot about trials and tests. And so I'll just give you what Paul said because it makes the point I want to make. There's no temptation taken you, but such is common to man. But God is faithful, who will with the temptation make a way to escape that you may be able to bear it. Now forgive me for quoting the King James and showing you the ESV is just how I ride. Too many years of reading the King James, I can't quite get it out of my head. But don't miss the point. God is the one who, even in the trial, is making the way, is preparing the path that you can go through it. It doesn't have to defeat you. It doesn't have to lead to your fall. Quite the opposite. It should lead to your strengthening of your faith. That's how he set it up. Our God has always had a disposition towards his people, and that is exactly what Moses is telling his father-in-law now. Let's be honest. Does he gloss over the struggle? Does he go like, oh, it was such a great trip, you should have been there. Man, we just had a good time. Not at all. He's honest with the facts, and we need to be honest with the facts. But at the end of the day, we need to be honest with the most important fact. And Yahweh has been with me. The Lord Jesus Christ has been with me the whole way. He is the one who has delivered me. When I looked back in the sand and saw the one set of footprints, it was his as he carried me. And so I would end with that. That's what he's telling his father-in-law. He is really declaring the greatness of his God. Verse 9. And Jethro rejoiced for all the good that Yahweh had done to Israel in that he had delivered them out of the hand of the Egyptians. Okay, so here we are. Jethro responds, and we're told that he rejoices. This is a rare term in the Torah. It literally means to have a deep, penetrating gladness. Now, this is the priest of Midian, and here he is rejoicing at what Yahweh has done for the people of Israel. He has this deep, penetrating joy for what God has done, for the hand of God being stronger than the hand of the Egyptians. This Gentile priest almost appears to be worshiping God. And don't worry, he's going to here in a second. So don't let me bury the lead. He's going to worship God in a second. But he almost seems to be rejoicing at what God has done for the people of another nation. Now, you would say, yeah, but that's his son-in-law. This is a whole other nation as well. And I would just remind us in passing, I don't have a verse, Romans 12:13. When believers rejoice, we should rejoice. And when they weep, we should weep. Here, Jethro is applying this New Testament concept. He's rejoicing at what God has done through the nation of Israel. Verse 10. Then Jethro said, Blessed be Yahweh, Baruch Yahweh, blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of Pharaoh, has delivered you, the people, from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people. And I'll add a little parenthetical of riches, and look what he did. So let's walk through this. Jethro responds now with not a compliment to Moses and his leadership, not a compliment to General Joshua and what a great job he did there as he went against the Amalekites. He rather responds in a doxology, blessed is some arbitrary unknown God. Blessed is Yahweh. He names God, the covenant-keeping God of Israel. Blessed is the God who Moses met at Mount Sinai. Blessed is that God. And then look how he describes what he did. For he delivered you out of the hand of Pharaoh. He delivered you out of the hand of the people of the Egyptians. And he delivered you out from under the oppressive hand of that nation. That's what he did. Blessed be his name. And then he says this. And Rich, I don't want to make too big of it. But here's what he says. Now I know. Now I know that Yahweh is greater than all gods. Now, we're not in his heart. Maybe he really doesn't mean that. Maybe he really doesn't mean now I know that Yahweh is the greatest. He's greater than any other God I've ever experienced in my Midianite experiences. But I will say this, as I reflected on this verse, I remember the day. I remember the day when I finally knew. The day I knew I was a sinner. The day I knew I needed a Savior. The day I knew that Jesus Christ was that Savior. That day I knew. I mean, knew like not head knowledge experientially. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt where I was, where he was, and what he had done for me. And I cannot help but wonder if at this point in time, Jethro knew who Yahweh really was. He said the nation of Egypt dealt arrogantly with the Israelites, but God responded measure for measure. They destroyed the infants in the Red Sea. Yahweh destroyed their army. Or they destroyed the infants in the Nile. God destroyed their army in the Red Sea. Measure for measure. This idea that the Lord is great is all over the scriptures. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised. His greatness is unsearchable. It's one thing to say God is great. It's quite another to say, and no man has fathomed his greatness. No man has searched out his greatness. No man has found the end of his greatness. That's the God we serve. One more, and I'll leave it alone. Psalm 147, great is our Lord and abundant in power. His understanding is beyond measure. He is the God like nothing we fathom. His greatness exceeds our wildest imaginations. His understanding of all things goes beyond any comprehension we could even come close to having. That is the God we serve. That is the God who Moses is telling Jethro about, and that, I believe, is the God Jethro is declaring. He is unlike any other God I've ever seen, Moses. Verse 12. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, there it is again, Deb, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel, there they are, Kristen, to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. So following this massive confession of faith, if indeed it was a massive confession of faith by Jethro, Reuel, Hobab, following this massive confession of faith, he now presides over a sacrificial meal and he brings an olah. He brings a burnt offering. Now, a burnt offering is an offering that you bring that will be totally consumed by fire. The entire offering is to be given to God, and the fire will consume the entire thing. He brings a burnt offering and other sacrifices, we're told. So not just that, but other sacrifices to Yahweh. Now, you've experienced the burnt offering a couple of times already. Let me show you two. Let me show them. The first place you experienced it was in our Genesis study. Noah, coming off the ark, built an altar to Yahweh. He took some of every clean animal and every clean bird, and he offered burnt offerings there on that altar to Yahweh, totally consumed by fire to Yahweh. This is total consecration to God. This is all given to God. I'm not going to eat a fraction of it. I'm not going to keep anything back. This is all to him and all to his glory. The next time you saw it was a little more shocking. Genesis 22. Yahweh said to Abraham, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will tell you about. Can you imagine that direction? Can you put yourself in Abraham's shoes? It's not just to offer your son as an offering. It's to offer him completely and totally as a burnt offering. Now, we know the rest of the story, so I don't want to leave it there. The rest of the story, they traveled to the land of Moriah. Isaac in Genesis 22, verse 7, says to his father Abraham, my father? And he said, here I am, my son. He said, behold the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went, both of them, together. Now we know the story. The Lord did provide in that historical moment the ram. The ram's horns were caught in the thicket that was the substitute. But we also know, according to the writer of Hebrews, what Abraham thought. Abraham thought he was going to offer his son as a burnt offering. He was going to receive him in resurrection. He was believing that God was going to raise him from the dead. He truly believed in his mind he was going to do it. He was fully committed to do it, believing that God, the promised son, would somehow bring him back to life. But all of that is pointing us to the ultimate burnt offering, the Lord Jesus Christ, who bore the fires of God on our behalf. That's why Paul would say things like this that he did to the church in Ephesus. Walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. He said, love like that one who gave himself totally. But here we see that Jethro, Reuel, Hobab is offering a burnt offering and other sacrifices to Yahweh, and they're celebrating a meal together. And notice, Kristen, who's celebrating? Aaron, along with Moses, as well as the elders. So these elders are definitely involved in the leadership, but not extremely involved. And we're going to see that in just a moment. But here they are celebrating this meal. This may have been a covenant meal between the Midianites and the Israelites. The Midianites, now under Jethro, worshiping the true and living God. The Israelites worshiping the true and living God. We don't know, but we do know what's going on. Any questions before we advance the story? As they celebrate, as Jethro offers these sacrifices, he offers this burnt offering, they celebrate this meal together. Okay. Verse 13. The next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. Okay, I had to wet my whistle there. So only a day passes between that commentary, between Jethro showing up, between the burnt offerings, between the meal, between all of that, everything that happened. The next day, we go from the mountaintop celebration with the elders, with Aaron. We go from that big day to the exhausting work of administration of a nation of 2 to 2.5 million people. And we read that Moses sat to judge. That's exactly how a judge would do in the ancient Near Eastern custom. Judges, teachers, they sit while the petitioners stand. That's exactly what happened. He's sitting to judge. Notice they're standing from morning till evening. This is the hint of a problem. This is the hint of one judge and 2 million people. This is the hint of every little thing that needs to be decided is going to be decided by one man as he sits to judge, and you wait all day to provide your case. That's what you should hear. That's what is developing. This reveals a critical stage in the development of Israel. Just a few months ago, they were a nation of slaves who reported to taskmasters. They're now a sovereign nation. And here, the only one leading them at this point is Moses. He is the one who's providing them the oracles of God. And when there's some type of issue, like Deb, you're saying, I stole your slacks or something, then we've got to take it to Moses, and Moses has to decide. That's what's happening here. And you may be wondering, why would Rich steal Deb's slacks? We got another story. We'll save it for another time. Verse 14. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone and all the people stand around you from morning till evening?" So Jethro, this priest of Midian, watches all this go down for a day. He's like, "What is this you are doing? Why are you doing this? Why are you sitting here the whole day? And why is everybody standing around you to bring their cases to you?" You can put yourself in Jethro's head. He's looking at this going, "Son-in-law, what are you doing?" But he's not done talking. Verse 15. Oh, sorry. Got ahead of myself. Verse 15. Then Moses responded, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God, when they have a dispute, they come to me. I decide between one person and another, and I also make known the statutes of God and his laws." So he explains, listen, they come to me, I decide the case, and if there's some law or statute involved, some principle, I give them the principle, and Kristen has a question. So you see what he's saying. I unpack it for them. I teach them, I give them the voice of God.
So, because it says that it's God's law, does this mean that before he goes up to Mount Sinai, they would have had 11 months to know not to worship idols?
Already God is unpacking right and wrong. Already God is, through Moses, settling civil disputes. Already when he settles them, Moses is explaining why that's the settlement. But he's the only guy doing it. And this load is becoming unbearable. Well, it's unbearable, and Jethro just saw it. Verse 17. Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing is not good." By the way, you've heard that before. It is not good that man should dwell alone. This is a very serious phrase in the Torah. This is very powerful. Moses, Jethro, looks at the guy who just led the nation of Israel out of Egypt, and he says, "What you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourselves out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone." Here's the test. Will Moses hear wisdom even when it comes from Jethro? Will you and I hear wisdom regardless of who it comes from? If it is true, it is true. If it is wisdom, it is wisdom. If it is biblical, it is biblical. It doesn't matter if it came out of a poem. It doesn't matter where it came from, because ultimately all truth comes from God. And if it is true, but how will Moses handle this? Moses is justified. He's explained. Now Jethro responds. Verse 19, continuing his response. "Obey my voice. I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. And you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws," there it is, Kristen, "and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do." Now, as you read this, you're thinking like me, well, it sounds like he's already doing that. I'm not sure, Jethro, you're giving any new advice here. He's already doing that. He's already deciding. He's being the oracle of God. He's already explaining. But go on, verse 21. "Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, men who are trustworthy, men who hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens, and let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you. You will be able to endure, and all the people also will go to their place in peace. They will go in shalom." Thank you, brother. Notice what he says. Next, you're to find able men. That means men of strength and men of valor. But notice he's not talking about, before we go to Gina, notice he's not talking about physical strength or physical valor. He's talking about moral strength. He's talking about moral valor. They're to be men who fear God. They're to be men who are trustworthy. They're to be men who hate bribes. Gina.
So is all this happening before the Ten Commandments, or
It is.
after, before?
We have not had the mountaintop experience yet. Moses has not went out on the mountain. God has not descended on the mountain. All of this is happening in advance. Absolutely, Gina. Thank you for that question. But notice what Jethro says. You need to divide the labor here. But you divide it by finding men who fear God, a proper vertical priority, men who are trustworthy, a proper horizontal authority, and men who can't be bribed. Throughout the scriptures, the Bible warns bribery subverts justice. Look for men who cannot be bribed, because bribery always subverts justice. And you see, he recommends a structure, a hierarchy. Men will oversee tens and fifties and hundreds and thousands. Now, you've just led the nation of Israel out of Egypt. You've just crossed the Red Sea. You've just done all of this stuff. Who is Jethro to tell you anything? The truth is the truth every time it is the truth. My prayer for Rich's life, yours as well, but mine for sure, is that I remain teachable. Moses, as we will see, remains teachable. He sees the truth, he recognizes the truth, and he responds as such. Verse 24. So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law. He did all that he said, not some of it, all of it. He listened to it. He's like, you know what? I think this is right. I think I'm wearing myself out. I think justice delayed is justice denied. And if people got to stand around all day to get justice, they're going to sooner or later get tired of that. I think he's right. Yes, sir. Oh, Mike's coming, so I'll keep talking until he gets there. Moses chose able men, like he was instructed, out of all of Israel and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They judged the people at all times. Any hard case they brought to Moses, but any small matter they decided. He set up the first judicial hierarchy for the nation of Israel, all executed from advice he got from Jethro. Blonde lady in the front.
I was just going to repeat something I said earlier. Is that the power of delegation is great. It's great for the leader, for the process, for those in the process, and I just want to say it's a good thing.
And so Sandy said that in the earlier class, and I will say what I said in the earlier class. She repeated, I'll repeat. I am very thankful for those who help execute this class. I'm really left to just teaching, and I have other people who take care of all the hard work. It's in their spiritual giftedness, not in my giftedness. And so I am very thankful for the opportunity to delegate. And we all should be. We should look to operate within our spiritual giftedness and allow others to operate in their spiritual giftedness, because when we do that, that's when the machine runs as it should run. I'll say one more thing. Isn't it interesting to you that Jethro, this side character from nowhere, a nobody from no place almost, and look at his role in Exodus 18. He is declaring the greatness of God recorded in our scriptures. He is giving a burnt offering to Yahweh recorded in our scriptures. He is giving advice to the deliverer of Israel according to our scriptures. And I would just remind all of us, we all are players in God's story. And these small roles can prove to be very significant. Such was Jethro's. Linda.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say we are seeing this today. We are seeing, unfortunately, that some men in power are able to be bribed, delaying justice. And by faith, we stand as Christians knowing that God is sovereign.
Amen. And knowing that God hates bribes. It's all over the Bible. I gave you just two. God detests bribes, for it subverts justice. We'll end here in verse 27 because I'm well out of time. Moses let his father-in-law depart. He went away to his own country. Again, if we understand this right, and I believe we do, that this is not going to actually happen for 11 months. But you see why Moses put it here. He's done talking about Jethro here in the book of Exodus. He's about to talk about Yahweh. He's about to talk about what happened on the mountain. He's about to talk about how Yahweh descended on Mount Sinai and it went up like smoke. He's about to talk about the shaking that occurred at Mount Sinai. He's about to talk about the fear that entered the nation of Israel as they saw Yahweh in the form of everything that was happening there on Mount Sinai. So Lord willing, we will pick right back up there, Exodus 19, as we slip on our Israelite sandals and encounter Yahweh at Mount Sinai. Any closing thoughts before I pray us out the door?